Murder Drones is an animated horror comedy that has many references to horror movies and horror film theory. The show feels experimental in both its storytelling and visuals, which can feel a little jumbled at times, but for me, this all changed with episodes 6 and 7. As the story begins to wrap up, the stakes were elevated, as was the horror. The show has always struck a delicate balance with both horror and comedy at its core, meaning it never takes itself too seriously, even with all its violence and creepy plot lines. This means the horror is kept in check by many of the show's features. By looking at Murder Drones, we can understand how the animation is using horror to great effect, while also toning it down in order to have the freedom to be more experimental in its tone. For example, by using robots that are animated in unrealistic ways, it never becomes too graphic or disturbing. The robots are cute and childlike in their proportions, reminiscent of anime, and quite different from humanoid characters. Their faces are smooth and lack any realism. They can be decapitated, lose limbs, spurt blood everywhere, and it's all a-okay because they aren't human. And speaking of humans, even they are represented at first as shadowy figures, their deaths mostly off-screen. In episode 6 we see Tessa, a seemingly human character as she's bitten by a robotic dinosaur and we see real human blood. But Tessa is faceless. She's always dressed in a spacesuit and rarely shows a single inch of human skin. We don't get expressions of pain or heavy focus on her injuries. She plays off most of the violence as jokes, and even cuts herself on purpose to taunt one of the Sentinels. It's as if the show is trying to play up the goofiness of her bleeding. Tessa is depicted as inhuman, and so like the robots, she remains distant from any real sense of horror. All this is to say, by having cute robots as our protagonists, the horror can go as far as it wants, but it will never be straight up horror. Episode 7 is where things are really pushed to their extreme, as Tessa is decapitated by N and then comes back to life as it's revealed she's not human, but in fact Sin in disguise. She takes off her helmet and we see that Sin now wears Tessa's skin, which is the most gruesome the show has gotten so far. It's like Midsommar but for kids. However, her face doesn't look that bad, and this is where the animated style really does the work to tone down the horror of what we're seeing, because although she's wearing Tessa's face, it's relatively cartoon and unrealistic. While I love the tone this show has struck, I can't help but feel a little frustrated that it's so rare for animation to fully embrace horror. I will admit that I had the wrong idea about the show as I first watched it. I was expecting it to be more scary, something akin to a movie like It or Signs, horror movies for teens and adults. But the comedy aspect really is important to this show, and it's not trying to be straight up horror. The church setting in episode 7 is a great homage to horror films, and it's super creepy. But this crucifix being used as a USB stick to exorcise a demon robot? That's hilarious and creative, and it works because it's a clever use of horror elements that plays with our expectations. The animation frees the show from the constraints of one genre, allowing it to really blend comedy and horror in unique ways. This is great, however, I think for me the show also proves that horror is still underutilized in animation, especially Western animation. The scariest parts of this episode are the backgrounds. This scene of N being dragged through the underground? It looks like something straight out of Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Although I enjoy Murder Drones quite a bit, I can't help but imagine what a straight-up horror done in this style would look like. Animation already has a hard time being taken seriously. Horror animation has it even harder, and so I understand why we see more comedies in animated shows. I think the popularity of kiddie horror games like FNAF and Poppy Playtime, or dark comedy shows like Hazbin Hotel, Murder Drones, and even The Amazing Digital Circus, all kind of prove that there's a market for darker stories that don't go too far. But it's definitely trying to go in that darker direction. Being able to tap into this market of both kids and adults makes a show like Murder Drones very successful, but it also limits the horror quite a bit in order to do that. In the future, I'd love to see indie animation take on straight horror, or really just animated horror that isn't made for kids primarily, or isn't comedy horror. Western audiences still seem to view animation as for kids, and these YouTube indie shows are really pushing the boundaries, and I love them for that. I hope they keep pushing. Murder Drones proves you can do horror incredibly well in animation and still gain an audience. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, or if you would even like to see more videos on Murder Drones, let me know in the comments. Bye!